Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have two very special guests who just published a book in November 15th, 2023. Full title of the book is Pipe the Bimbo in Red, Dean Andrews, Jim Garrison, and the Conspiracy to Kill JFK. And the authors are Donald Jeffries and William Matson Law. If you listen to my show, I've been on, I think Don and I, this will be our fourth show. We've been on other shows together. But we did a show on his excellent book, Masking the Truth, How COVID-19 Destroyed Civil Liberties and Shut Down the World. And also we did another one on Borrowed Fame, Money, Mysteries, and Corruption in the Entertainment World. And I had him on the first time to talk about somebody I think is an important political figure that kind of gets lost in history, and that is Huey Kingfish Long. But also, he's written 9 books. I think he's put out 3 books this year, so he's a very prolific author and hard to keep up with. So I'm glad to have him on the show. And also joining us is William Matson Law. He's written this will be his 4th book. And the one that I saw on Amazon is titled In the Eye of History, Disclosures in the JFK Assassination Medical Evidence. But like the title says, it's about this really interesting guy in New Orleans, Dean Andrews. And today is literally the 60-year anniversary of the assassination of JFK. So it's an important story. And I'm glad to have them both here. So Donald and William, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So for people who may not have heard the last shows that I did with Don or know your name, William, maybe you guys can talk about your background. I know you have a very long background, Don, on the JFK assassination research side. Maybe you can just do a background and then what led up to you working together on this book, Pipe the Bimbo in Red.
Okay, well, I go back. I'm getting seniority all the time. I don't know. I hope maybe the oldest critic standing at some point, or the most tenured critic, because I started out as very young. I was a teenager, and I was a volunteer for Mark Lane's Citizens Committee of Inquiry, and very heady stuff. I got to go to the archives and hold the crappy Carcano and the magic bullet and see the clothing and all that, and had a private viewing of the Zapruder film frame by frame and stuff. So I was like 18. It was pretty heady stuff for a kid, but I've never looked back. Of course, I've written about a lot more stuff, but that's the one that set me down the primrose path, of popularity in the conspiracy world, but not anywhere else. So I started out there, and this book is really William came up with the title. So all you women out there who are infuriated, write him. He's the one that came up with the title, and he also really wanted to do this book. Dean Andrews III, and there are some coincidences in his life. He came into my life through my late brother, and people know I've talked about Ricky a lot. I think the hospital murdered him with COVID protocol and all that a couple of years ago, but somehow, like 20 years ago, they got together and became best friends. Still astonished by it. Kind of a cosmic coincidence. And so Dean was fascinated by the fact that, I was in the Kennedy assassination so much and knew about his dad's testimony and everything. So he quickly became a favorite. We invited him back when we used to entertain all the time. He came to many, many holiday gatherings, and people can see a nice picture of him and my brother and me in the book at one of those Christmas gatherings or something, birthdays or something. But so Dean was fascinating to me, and I guess I was fascinated to him, but I never really thought that much about making a book based on him. But William was the one that really pushed that, and he said, I think there's a book here, and obviously there was. And so this is not just about Dean or Dean III, but it's really the central figure. I mean, it's kind of centered around him, but we just talk about what I call the ground level plot in New Orleans, and that is the people that I don't think were the actual conspirators of JFK, including Oswald, that were all manipulated. And first and foremost, Oswald, I think he was manipulated into that group by whatever agency he was working for and told to report back on the plot to kill the president. And for all I know, all the others were told the same thing, except Clay Shaw, who we delve into quite a bit in this book, and his incredible connections to go back to World War II. Clay Shaw was a very powerful figure, and I think he was the conduit between those ground level conspirators who were all being used in different ways and the real conspirators in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere. So that's what the book is about. It's a lot about Dean. William interviewed Dean III on the record. It's the first time he's spoken out. And there's also a great interview in there with Raymond Russo that William did. One of the few interviews I guess he gave later in life ended up being one of Garrison's most important witnesses. So we're proud of it, and it's very timely. We got it out just before the 60th anniversary, so hopefully people that are interested in the subject will check it out.
And how about you, William? How did you you were compiling a lot of information that went into this, that interview with Russo, who, if you watch the JFK movie, is played by Kevin Bacon, right? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Right. I saw the Zapruder film for the first time, like a lot of people did, back in 1975 on Good Night America with Geraldo Rivera, and it was just so gruesome. And I remember sitting there watching that. But I really didn't get into it until I stumbled across a book talking about Kennedy's assassination in the 1980s. And in this book was autopsy photographs of Kennedy that I'd never seen before. And to my untrained eyes, I could tell something wasn't quite right. I didn't know what, but I took the book home. I read it over and over again. Basically, the premise of this book was that somewhere between Parkland, when Kennedy died, and the body was taken to Bethesda, that the body had been gotten to somehow, and bullets removed from the body, or the wounds changed on the body. And this sounded preposterous, but I couldn't get over it. So I started reading everything I could on Kennedy's assassination. And then when the information got repetitive to me, I started calling people in Dealey Plaza that were in the plaza that had been on President Kennedy's detail. It just kind of snowballed for me. And that led me to talking to some of the people that had a hand in President Kennedy's autopsy. And that was my first book in the eye of history. Things just went on from there. I later did a book with Hugh Clark, who was one of the people that took Kennedy's casket to Arlington Cemetery. So that's kind of how it all just got started for me.
So both of you guys, I mean, it's been some time, 60 years. So you guys started very early back in the day. Mark Lane was, what was his famous book? It was
Rush to Judgment.
Rush to Judgment. Thank you. So that was one of the first ones.
Yeah.
But it all goes back to New Orleans, like in this Dean Andrews character, who's played by John Candy, who really is a vivid kind of character in the movie JFK. Well, who was Dean Andrews, and why is he important? He knew everybody, right?
Yeah, well, Dean Andrews is important because he really it's not talked about much, but as I understand it, Jim Garrison's interest, they say he had John Barber claims it was Hale Boggs. I've always heard it was Russell Long. That's the way it was. Russell Long was played by Walter Matthau. That's what was depicted in Oliver Stone's JFK. But I think before that, he was, or maybe it was right after that, but the testimony that really grabbed his eye in the Warren Commission hearings is Dean Andrews Jr.'s testimony. Now, if you study the Warren Commission's evidence like we have, the 20, and I've gone through the 26 volumes to the best I can. I mean, it's like it's not easy. It's like reading War and Peace when you just take a bunch of tranquilizers. I mean, it's pretty difficult plowing through it, but because most of it's meaningless. But I think of all the testimony in there, and William may agree or not, the most fascinating testimony and the most important testimony comes from Dean Andrews Jr. You read it. First of all, it's got the cool beatnik lingo in there, snippets of it, which makes it interesting, just right there. And, you got to love somebody that, he's the one you think of Maggie's drawers and Oswald's abilities as a shooter. Again, that comes from Dean Andrews. Dean Andrews said he couldn't shoot. I mean, Nelson Delgado also talked about it later, but Dean Andrews brought that up first. And he said at the end, he said, there are three people I'm going to find. The Mexican, we're not sure who that means, Clay Bertrand, and the real person that shot the president. So, I mean, he's throwing that out there. And like you can hear the Warren Commission counsel say, what? Are you insinuating it wasn't Oswald? And he said, I know I know full good and well it wasn't Oswald. And so his testimony is unlike anybody else's in the record. And but the reason why he was called as a witness and why he's important is because he, at the time of the assassination, and we have a lot of background on this, we have some new disclosures from Dean III that are bombshells about what was going on in that hospital. But he was in the hospital for a relatively minor medical problem at the time of the assassination. And he was called on the evening of November 22nd, or the late afternoon of the 22nd. and asked after Oswald had been arrested by a Clay Bertrand. And he was asked to represent Lee Harvey Oswald as his attorney. And lots of this, I've questioned it a lot. Why was he called? Why did they pick him? How did they know he's in the hospital? This is, did they do it to rope him in or whatever? And he was going to do it. And we have all the details in there about how his secretary very strangely said she couldn't go to Dallas with him, she was very loyal. That was kind of a weird thing. But at any rate, that began Dean Andrews spiraling his family. And that's why this is a background issue of what happened to the Andrews family, too, through Dean III. And so we see this was a prominent New Orleans lawyer. He headed up the New Orleans Jazz Festival. They led a great life. And their lives were never the same after he got drawn into the Garrison investigation, because he felt compelled to lie. And Dean III admits it. That he lied, and he lied to protect himself and his family. He thought, he was scared. He saw all the other people dying. As he said at one point, they can crush me like a bug, and his great language that he had. And one of his other great statements, I like to breathe, which is just, that's just such a profound statement. I like to breathe. And so he is a fascinating character just for the beatnik. How many beatniks in history, do we have documented, especially associated with the JFK assassination? So, he's a fascinating character, and he's the central focus in many ways of the book. But and the fact that his son came into my life, and Dean III has the book now. He's happy with it. I'm glad to hear that. He likes the picture we took. We selected for him with my brother and me. So this is, but the phone call is what brought Dean III in, and that was because they had to discredit, and you can see that's what Oliver Stone's JFK went very far with that, where Clay Shaw's, there are lots of evidence that his alias was Clay Bertrand. He signed a card in a hotel, and you have Officer Hagenborst, whatever the guy's name was, that they wouldn't allow him to talk about, that he listed Bertrand as an alias. It was important because that's Clay Shaw, who's the president of the New Orleans trademark and has all these powerful connections. And he does. And again, you go back to World War II. And we'll talk about, that's, talked about in detail in the book. But if that's, what is this guy doing calling Dean Andrews? So Dean Andrews had to backpedal. He told many different stories. He ended up, to his shame, appearing as one of the big witnesses in the NBC attack piece, through Walter Sheridan, who was caught bribing Terry Raymond, Musso, and so forth, and somehow nothing happened to him. But the piece was so biased that they had to give Garrison 30 minutes of FCC time to respond. It was so unfair. But so this is a story, obviously the ground level plot, but it is as a backdrop of what happened to one family. But I have great sympathy for Dean Andrews Jr. because I understood why he felt like he had to do what he did. He did to protect his family, and it still didn't matter. I mean, Dean III's, he doesn't mind me telling you, he just lost his brother, his younger brother recently. We could commiserate because we each lost a brother in the last couple of years. And, he freely admits he was a lifelong drug abuser. And I don't think that would have happened if this had, because his Dean Andrews Jr. was locking this kid, the youngest boy, he was locking him out of the house after school because he was paranoid. He thought they were going to come to get him. So that's the backdrop of this. Is Dean knew there was a conspiracy. He did it. He was very paranoid. He thought they were going to get him, and his family, obviously suffered as a result. They went from being kind of one of the upper crust families, or certainly an upper class family in New Orleans, a very prominent lawyer, to that, where they all had different issues and typical dysfunction and everything. But it's a fascinating story. And the New Orleans, that's why we talked about Harold Weisberg a lot, because he's the one really who started the ball rolling in New Orleans with Oswald New Orleans, which is an underappreciated book. And so we quoted a lot from his research in the book.
Gotcha. And William, what's your kind of take on Dean Andrews?
New Orleans, the New Orleans aspect of this whole thing has always fascinated me. I've got a soft spot in my heart, and I've got a soft spot in my heart for Garrison. As a matter of fact, I named one of my children Garrison after Jim Garrison. And so that's how I feel about this. Dean Andrews was quite a character. And I want to get one thing straight. Pipe the Bimbo in Red, the title of the book, it refers to a scene in JFK where Dean Andrews and Jim Garrison are about to have a conversation. And the scene opens in the movie with this beautiful woman in red going past. And Dean Andrews says, "Pipe the Bimbo in Red." And then begins this conversation about his testimony and how could Oswald change so much between, the testimony that you gave, to the Warren Commission and his height and all that. So that's where the title comes in, because it starts this fascinating conversation. And according to Dean Andrews III, his son, he said, Candy did a pretty good job of portraying my dad as far as the look and the jive talk. He got all that right. Dean Andrews really fascinates me, and the language he used. And he had this persona of when he was in public. Dean said that when he was in court, he could make all the judges laugh. They really liked him a lot. But he said when he was at home, he wasn't like that at all. He wasn't on. He was just his dad. So I really wish I could have met Dean Andrews. He was quite a character, although I did get to talk to, Dean Andrews III, and I really connected with him. The backdrop of this book is that it really ruined their lives. It ruined Dean Andrews' life. It did something to his son. It did something to all the family members. Anybody that was connected to this case in New Orleans. It changed
and Garrison too, right? Garrison's life and his family
it
paid the
changed
price.
them all. It damaged them all. It put them under the microscope. The interesting thing is that Garrison and Dean Andrews got along. They were friendly. And what I learned that I didn't know from talking to Dean was that there was a connection, more of a connection than I ever thought possible between Dean Andrews and Carlos Marcello.
Yeah.
Didn't know that stuff before. We got a lot of new stuff in here that I think is really good.
Who was Carlos Marcello? Why is Marcello important? And how did Dean Andrews know him?
Go ahead and take that.
Well, Carlos Marcello was, I guess, considered the mob boss of New Orleans, and a lot of researchers have speculated that that want to put the mafia involved here. They speculated that Marcelo Andor, Santos Trafficante were kingpins in this. I don't think that's true at all, but we do know that Marcello was friends with Dean Andrews Jr. and liked him, and at one point may have saved his life, according to Dean. And so young Dean, grew up to, like he said, Jim Garrison would call his house regularly, and he'd answer the phone, and Jim Garrison would, the booming voice say, "Young Dean," he'd call him Young Dean, and he had met Marcello. In fact, he told William and I his impression of Marcello wasn't a very strong one, because he said he had such a limp-wristed, weak handshake, for a mob boss. And he said his father told him, he doesn't need to impress you. He can be quiet and soft-spoken. It doesn't matter. He doesn't care about his handshake. He said that's real power, or something like that. So it's interesting hearing these. You can tell Dean grew up with not only the beatnik philosophy, but his father, gave him those kind of gems as well.
And Marcello kind of had a history with the Kennedy brothers, right? Like Robert F. Kennedy kicked him out of the country.
Yeah, well,
I think he was flown back. He was flown back by ferry, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, he was. Marcello was the one, I believe, that and Bobby Kennedy. I loved a lot about Bobby Kennedy, but he had gotten to the point where he was willing to skirt the law. He was the attorney general, and he'd gotten so frustrated with being unable to convict these mobsters in court because the juries were scared to convict them. They were threatened. So he just basically abducted him on a street and went and dropped him off in the jungles of Guatemala or something. I mean, that's what he was doing. And so you can imagine how that incensed these guys were. But Ferry's connection to Marcello was such that on the day of the assassination, he was in court with Carlos Marcello. So and he did work as his pilot and so forth. So Ferry had interesting connections to Marcelo, but he also had connections, obviously, to the CIA through the Civil Air Patrol. We explore a lot of that as well, some of the interesting aspects of the people that were in the Civil Air Patrol.
Yeah, it's remarkable. It's remarkable how that was. New Orleans was really this kind of like a staging ground for all those characters for the assassination that ended up in Dallas. It's really something else. William, would you mind talking about who Russo was and why he was important and what it was like interviewing him?
Perry Raymond Russo was a 25-year-old insurance salesman, and after a lot of this had come to light, apparently Perry had called Garrison and said, I know some things that I think you should know. And that's when the information got to Garrison that there was apparently a party at Ferry's one night where he overheard them talking about, they were going to get this guy, and it turned to how to get Kennedy. How can we get Kennedy? And there were some Cubans there and some other people. And Perry related this. He was quite a character. I never met him, but I had some conversations with him over the phone when I called him. And this was back in the day when you could just pick up the phone and dial him, and pick up. And he was driving for a cab company, and he was very colorful. And when I first called him, he said, "Look, can you call me back in about 10 minutes?" I said, "Sure." So I did, and he had apparently readied some materials because the way he was talking was almost like he was reading from something, and he had articles that he would read me part of it and then comment on it. So he was ready. He was a fascinating character. And what he said, you come to New Orleans, and he said, I'll take you around and point out the different sites, and we'll go by Ferry's apartment and things like that. And it was 2 or 3 years before I decided I was going to go there. So I called him back, and he says, William, he says, yeah, he says, I'm not feeling too good. Call me back in a couple of days, will you? And I waited a month or two because I wanted him to be on his best so that we could confirm that I was going to come down there and do all these things. I called him and got his machine, left a message, waited a couple of days, called again, and got his machine. And I called again, and the number had been disconnected. So I started asking around, and he had died. So that was a little weird.
And a lot of these guys, they die young. Like I think even Andrews passed away 58. Pretty, these days kind of.
I think Perry was 53.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
And they knew. I mean, I remember the book, The Hit List. There's just so many suspicious things after 63. It was just like 60s. It was terrible. I mean,
you'll find, and we found that we were the. You'll find out explosive information on Ed Vogel, who was Lee Harvey Oswald's best friend in high school. So I talked to his family, and I won't spoil it, but read it in the book. You'll be amazed that we found that this hit list went very deep, and we found new victims like that haven't generally been necessarily thought to be there. But one of the cool things Oliver Stone did in his movie that involving Russo, and William knows this. I think Russo talked about it with you, but he used the real Perry Raymond Russo in the bar. I guess the bar scene where JFK's death was announced or something, and it's the real Russo, because Russo really did hate JFK in real life, and so he's just talking like himself, saying, "Yeah, they should have killed the communists." No, that's what he really felt, and it was interesting that he said, just like Oliver Stone also I thought was really cool. He cast Jim Garrison, an aging, almost dead Jim Garrison, as Earl Warren in the film. So I think those were really cool casting choices he made.
There was also Willem Oltmans was in there too. At least he was in the takeouts, and he was kind of a investigator from Europe. What did he play? I'm not sure what he played. You're right. I think he played de Mohrenschildt, and he knew. I mean, his relationship, the JFK is so full of weird stuff. His relationship with de Mohrenschildt was just blow your mind.
Let me tell you a little story. When I was talking to Perry, he said I was in the movie. Talking about JFK, and said, "Yeah, you're the guy at the bar, right?" He says, "Yeah, right." He says to the director, he says, "Well, what do you want me to say?" He says, "Well, just say what you feel." So he says, I start, die, Kennedy, die, bastard. And he says, there are short versions of that take and there are long versions of that take. And he said, at one point, he said, I stood up and said something, and it had swear words in it. And he yelled in Kevin Costner's direction. He says, all of a sudden, the whole room goes quiet. He says, Oliver Stone, who was in the next room looking at a monitor, came out. And he walks right up to him and he says, he gets 2 inches from my face. And he says, don't yell at Kevin. He says, oh, you don't want me to yell at Kevin? I won't yell at Kevin.
Interesting. Yeah, that must have been an interesting set. There's a lot of characters in that movie too. That's really something else. And Garrison, one of your friends too, Don, you mentioned him, John Barber, knew Garrison and talked to Garrison face to face.
Yes. Yeah.
It's a really important piece of history. This is pre-internet, right? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we included some quotes from John, and John is, he's 90 years old now, still going strong. I just did a show with him Monday. We did Jeff Rents with him again. So I think we've got a record number of shows we've done together. Now we do a show with John. It's basically him. I'm sitting there cheering him on because I know I can't share the stage with that guy, but he's amazing because he's 90 years old and he's like the Energizer Bunny. He doesn't come up for air. He's absolutely amazing. I can't imagine what he was like as a teenager. But John is the only person to interview Jim Garrison. Jim Garrison chose to talk to him after the Clay Shaw trial, and John tried to get his story on Real People when he was hosting and producing that, and it was the #1 show on TV. And so that's how John and I met, because our paths intersected because he was in the JFK world. And to my shock, he was interested in being friends with me. We just hit it off. And the rest is history. It's amazing. I never would have thought I would be such close friends with somebody like that. He was a personal writer for Frank Sinatra for 6 years. I mean, this guy had lots and lots of very powerful connections. So to be asked to write the foreword to his book, Your Mother's Not a Virgin, was, a true honor. But in the book, and I'm not going to put the spoiler out there, but in the book he reveals, because he had hours and hours of tape off the record with Jim Garrison. And in one of those moments, he asked Jim Garrison who was the point man behind the assassination. So Jim Garrison names the individual he thinks was the guy that signed off on it. So you may agree or may not agree, and but it's very, very interesting. And Garrison was, as William does, I didn't name my kid after Garrison, but I admire him very much. So this was a labor of love. I think he was treated so unfairly. And John Barber tells a story that I don't know too many men who could live up to something like this. The character of the man was shown by the fact, as you mentioned, William, his family did abandon him. That happens to all whistleblowers. Most of the people I interview, their family almost never stands beside them ever. And so he was no exception. So you can say, the great movie when he's telling Sissy Spacek as his wife, damn, Liz, I can't fight the whole world and you too. That's what he was doing. And it ended up that she decided to go with the whole world because she left him. And so she left him in his hour of need. He had a right to be bitter at her. And she remarried, and the guy ran through all her money, supposedly. But on his deathbed, Jim Garrison summoned her to his deathbed in the hospital. And he signed over his very lucrative pension as a judge to her. And obviously John Barber was impressed by that. I don't know if I've ever heard of such a magnanimous gesture before. I mean, I don't know, William, would you do that for one of your ex-wives? I don't know. I mean, I have no ex-wives to do that to, but most people wouldn't. I mean, that's just, you think about that. That's just an astonishing gesture, and it shows what a character he had. To do something like that. So I don't have much tolerance for people that try to badmouth him and everything. I think he was up against a media campaign, the likes of which, no one had seen up until that point. I mean, they just were he was being attacked, and he still is. If you still hear his name, you still hear Disinfo talked about him. Oh, he was soft on the mob. He liked Carlos Marcello. He didn't go.
He was taking money from gambling rooms, all kinds of stuff. They really went after him. Multi, character destruction. It's a shame. He's really an American hero because he really was doing all the original work. Like, was it Trail of the Assassins?
Yeah.
Like, he really laid the groundwork, I think. And a lot of people worked with him too. Why you talk about Weisberg, Forgot the comedian who worked with him. A lot of people.
Mort Saul.
Mort Saul, thanks. Yeah, I did a show on Mort Saul. So he was kind of like the spearhead in some ways of the people who know the Oswald did it stories.
And that's why when Weisberg, I talk in the book, we talk in the book about Weisberg getting very bitter as he turned on Garrison, and I think he was because he did do a lot of research for Garrison, but he was so mad that Oliver Stone, I think he was just jealous that Oliver Stone decided to make Garrison his protagonist in the film, and it was a logical choice. I think Weisberg thought he should have been, and very bitter. And he ended up leaking an advanced copy of JFK to Book World, and George Lardner Jr., who was a premier Mockingbird media member. I mean, this guy had been promoting disinfo for decades in the Post, and Weisberg should have despised that guy, but he was mysteriously friends with him. And so I don't know. Weisberg's a hero of mine too, but he did some very strange things, and I think he was really unfair to Garrison.
Yeah, Garrison had to endure that as well, not just the character assassination, but a lot of like betrayals and a lot of interpersonal things going through this process that would be I think he probably was disappointed. Didn't he lose employees and people screaming at him, all that stuff? I think it's
he was infiltrated. We go into that book a lot. He had 2 or 3 people that were obviously paid CIA or somebody that infiltrated, stole his files, and so when he came to trial, he was incredibly naive and trusting. And he ended up, there was a guy, and Stone shows a little bit of it in his film, but there was a man that told this impressive story about meeting Ferry and Shaw and everything. And they got him on the stand. It turns out he talked about when his daughter went away and came back, that she was replaced with a duplicate and things. So instant discredit. And you can see in the film, that's one of Boxley's witnesses. So that was a witness of one of the infiltrators that suggested these kind of cranks to make him look bad. So they were trying to, when they weren't murdering people. David Ferry, murdered with two type suicide notes, and the same day, Eladio Del Valle, connected to a lot of these things, found with a hatchet in his head, and I think shot 2 in Miami. So they had lots of witnesses that were scared, Julianne Mercer and lots more that would not come because they saw the witnesses that were dying. And they did not want to come there. Roger Craig, who ended up dying, Richard Randolph Carr, that were threatened, shot, before Craig was later killed. But so you can understand why a lot of these witnesses were scared to testify. So, and the fact that Garrison was up against the governors of several states who weren't extraditing witnesses, unheard of in those days. DAs, cooperate between states. That's governors cooperate with DAs of other states is unheard of, especially the investigation of the president of the United States. But 2 of those governors, interestingly enough, were Governor Ronald Reagan of California and Governor John Connally of Texas, who, of course, was shot. And you think he'd get to the truth of it, but they were 2 of those who protected witnesses. So Garrison couldn't get some of the most important witnesses. So he was left with Perry, Raymond, Russo, and to try to make the best case he could against Clay Shaw.
Yeah, amazing. And also, there's the Fletcher Proud characters in JFK, but you also have a letter that I've never seen between him and Oliver Stone. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's a fascinating, because it goes over. He talks about things that are not talked about generally in terms of munitions and things coming out of the Pentagon and weapon systems. I think it's very readers can read it. I mean, it's kind of hard to summarize, but he's giving more of his inside background and much more than Stone could show in the movie. Because in the movie, Prouty was basically his character based on him was Mr. X, played by Donald Sutherland, and he gives a little of that. So if you read that letter, you'll recognize some of the stuff, but it goes into much more detail. And Prouty was, and of course, Prouty's a victim of, the critical community has been taken over by what I'll call neocons, who are not, I don't think they're out for the truth, and they don't really believe that there was a conspiracy, or I don't know what they're working for. But one of the attacks recently in the last year, some of them went and started trying to ridicule and attack Fletcher Proud. And this is what they typically do. They will go after somebody who's a pro-conspiracy or on the conspiracy side, and they try to discredit. And I've argued with them many times. I said, what do you think is the evidence that there was a conspiracy? Because they try to, diminish any evidence for us. So what is your evidence for it? And they don't even have an answer. But I think Prouty was a great guy. Although I will tell you, I interviewed Barbara Honegger, who wrote October Surprise on my show a few months back. And I don't remember the exact details. People can probably find it in the archives at AmericaUnplugged.com. Fascinating interview. And at one point, she was summoned to meet Fletcher Proud years ago. And the way she described it, he was trying to recruit her into some kind of secret organization. I don't know, but she still liked him. You have to watch it. It's fascinating. I'd never heard anything like it before, but certainly a very interesting guy. And he's the one that really shed more light on the Secret Service, their failure to do their job, when he was talking about all the precautions that weren't taken and so forth. And I've written a lot about that.
And then, there's a lot of new information in this book. And where's the best place for people to find Pipe the Bimbo in Red?
Well, anywhere. I mean, there's, it's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. I don't know about William, but I always tell people to, except for my book, Masking the Truth, where I wanted people to buy from the publisher because I would get a lot more per book from that. But typically we get so little that, I just tell people, get the best deal you can. It's not going to make much difference to the author. So I would just tell them, I mean, I'm not a huge supporter of Amazon, but Amazon is important to writers because ratings, that's the only place where books are rated usually. And also the reviews, people look at the number of stars, and we had a nasty 1-star review, which by the way is down now, William. It's not there anymore. If you notice it or not, the 1-star. Yeah. I don't know what happened, but so we have a 5-star review from Sam Tripoli, by the way, big comedian.
Oh, nice.
I've been on a show before. And so people can rate it there, please, at Amazon if you can. The more ratings, the better. The numbers matter there.
Cool. That's cool. Sam Tripoli's got a very influential show. There's one more question I wanted to ask you. Something that I wasn't aware of was the church committee had a 150-page document on Oswald. Can one of you summarize that or kind of talk a little bit about that? I wasn't aware that document existed.
William, do you know any of that?
I don't.
Oh, okay.
I talk a little. I don't know if it's that document, but I do talk a little bit about the church committee in the book, and I think we do go over some. I don't know if it's that document or not, but there's so much material in there. But they did a lot of. Frank Church that's back when I was a Democrat. That was my kind of Democrat. That's the kind of guy that I liked, Frank Church. He was my boy. I would have voted for him for president.
Yeah, I think there was a book that just came out, said The Last Honest Man or something like that.
Yeah,
that was the title. Like he was really, and then these people, sadly, they pass away early.
Yes.
I think he had some.
They
really
brought out a lot of information. The church committee did a lot of good.
Yep.
Yeah, he was like from Idaho or something like that.
Yes,
Brilliant guy, but not one of these Eastern Brahmin types, CIA types. But yeah, he was a credit to the country, no question about it. The guy's amazing. It's really great to talk with you. Thanks so much for publishing this book. It's perfect timing. A lot of new information. And where can people find your other books and other material?
Well, I do it. Dawn Lambert, whose name I recognize over here in the chat, she's saying that she remembers. Oh, there you go. Remembers me from Facebook. I think hopefully you're still my friend on Facebook. I didn't get rid of you. Only real and friendly peeps I ever friended. Are you still that way? Well, I don't know. I'm just as real or unreal as I've ever been, I guess. I'm still pretty friendly, I think. I'm trying to be. But yeah, my books are, my website is donaldjeffries.media, and people can support me by going to Substack, donaldjeffries.substack.com. It's the only place I'm not being shadow banned, and the Substack is I Protest, just like my weekly live streaming show on these same fine channels, through StreamYard and Rockfin and so forth, YouTube.
And you're on Free World too, right? Free World FM.
Yes, in fact, my first show I think is going to be tonight if I can figure out how to do it, because I wanted. Nice. I said, well, let's start it on November 22nd. What more appropriate day for me? Perfect. So I'll be. I think that'll be my 5th or 6th show by then. So hopefully I still have a voice.
Cool. I've used the software to use Free World. It seems to function very easy for me. So hopefully it'll be the same for you. And you, William, where can people find your books or reach out to you online?
You can get them through Trine Day Publishing. You can get them at all the bookstores, better bookstores everywhere, Amazon.
And do you have social media? People can find you on Twitter or something like that. I know Dawn's
You
on
can,
Twitter. People
you can find me on Facebook.
Facebook under William Matson Law, right? Full name.
Yes.
Great. Thanks so much for your time. And the title of the book again is Pipe the Bimbo in Red, Dean Andrews, Jim Garrison, and the Conspiracy to Kill JFK. There's a lot more information in this book that we didn't even cover. So just published November 15th, 2023. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay